May 20th, 2025. Indiana State Prison. A man named Benjamin Ritchie woke up knowing it was his last day on Earth. But what happened in the hours that followed would shake the entire country and raise questions that still haunt us today. This is a story about justice, about science, and about what happens when things go terribly wrong behind closed doors. If you're curious about stories that make you think, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment below. What do you think justice should look like? But before we get to that shocking day in 2025, we need to go back. Way back. To understand this story, we need to understand Benjamin. Benjamin Ritchie was born with something wrong in his brain. Not something he chose. Not something he could control. His mother drank alcohol while she was pregnant with him, and it damaged his brain before he was even born. Doctors call this fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD for short. Imagine your brain is like a computer. Now imagine that computer was built with some of the wires crossed and some of the parts missing. That was Benjamin's brain. He couldn't think the way other people think. He couldn't control his emotions the way other people can. Growing up, Benjamin struggled. He got into trouble. He made bad choices. And on one terrible night in the year 2000, something happened that would change everything. A police officer named William Toney was killed. It was a tragedy that destroyed a family and shocked a community. Benjamin Ritchie was arrested. He was put on trial, and he was sentenced to death. For 25 years, Benjamin sat in a prison cell, waiting. The appeals went on and on. Lawyers argued about his broken brain. They brought in scientists who studied his case. Some doctors said his brain damage was so severe that he couldn't fully understand right from wrong the way other adults can. But the courts kept saying no. The death sentence would stand. Then came 2025. The final appeals were denied. The date was set, May 20th. Indiana hadn't executed anyone in 15 years. The last time was back in 2009. So when they prepared to execute Benjamin Ritchie, many people were watching closely. But here's where the story gets strange. Indiana does its executions in complete secrecy. No cameras allowed. No independent witnesses. No media. Just a small group of people behind closed walls. They plan to use a drug called pentobarbital. It's supposed to make someone fall asleep peacefully and then stop their heart. That's how it's supposed to work. On the morning of May 20th, Benjamin's lawyers made one final attempt to stop it. They filed emergency requests with the courts. They asked the governor for mercy. They explained again about his damaged brain, about how he was born with a disability he never chose. The governor, Mike Braun, said no. The court said no. The execution would proceed. Benjamin was moved to the execution chamber. The witnesses were brought in. Everything was prepared. At 12:30 in the morning, just 30 minutes after midnight, they began. The drug went into Benjamin's veins. And then something went wrong. What happened next would be hidden from cameras, hidden from the public, hidden from the world. But the few people in that room saw something that disturbed them deeply. Benjamin's body began to move. Not just a little. Not just normal reflexes. He moved violently. His body shook and jerked for several minutes. Witnesses would later say they'd never seen anything like it. Was he in pain? Was he suffering? The officials said no. These were just reflexes, they claimed. The drug had worked. He was unconscious. He couldn't feel anything. But how could they be sure? The execution team has no special medical training. They're not doctors. They're prison staff who follow a protocol. And in Indiana, everything about that protocol is secret. The public isn't allowed to know who's involved, what their qualifications are, or what exactly they do. 14 minutes after it started, at 12:44 a.m., Benjamin Ritchie was pronounced dead. The state of Indiana released a brief statement. The execution had been carried out. Justice had been served. But the witnesses who were there couldn't stop thinking about what they'd seen. Those violent movements. Those long minutes of uncertainty. One witness was a reporter named Tommy Kleckner. He'd seen executions before in other states. He said this one was different. The movements were extreme. They lasted longer than normal. Medical experts who heard about it were troubled too. When a brain is damaged the way Benjamin's was, they explained, drugs might not work the same way. The brain might react differently. The body might respond in unexpected ways. Could Benjamin have been aware? Could he have been suffering while appearing unconscious? We may never know the truth of what Benjamin Ritchie experienced in those final 14 minutes. There's no video, no independent medical monitors, no way to go back and check. And that's what makes this story so haunting. Because Benjamin Ritchie's case raises questions that go beyond one man, one crime, one execution. Questions about whether we can trust a system that operates in complete secrecy. Questions about what happens when we execute people whose brains don't work like ours. Questions about whether we truly know what we're doing. The facts are simple. Benjamin Ritchie killed a police officer. That was real. The grief of Officer Toney's family was real. The crime demanded consequences. But what happened on May 20th, 2025, in that closed room, with no cameras and no oversight? That raises questions we can't ignore. Picture a child, a little boy who can't sit still in class, who gets angry for reasons he can't explain, who tries to be good but somehow always ends up in trouble. That was Benjamin. His brain was damaged before he took his first breath. Scientists have studied FASD for years, and what they've learned is frightening. When a pregnant woman drinks alcohol, it crosses into the baby's bloodstream. It kills brain cells. It stops parts of the brain from forming correctly. The children born with this condition often look normal on the outside, but inside, their brains are wired differently. The part that controls impulses, the part that makes you stop and think before you act, it doesn't work right. The part that helps you understand consequences, that helps you plan for the future, it's damaged. Benjamin grew up struggling with all of this. He didn't know why he was different. He just knew that life was harder for him than it seemed to be for everyone else. And then came March 2000. What do you think? Can someone be held fully responsible for their actions if their brain was broken before they were born? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Officer William Bill Toney was a respected police officer in Beech Grove, Indiana. He was a father. He was a husband. He was the kind of person who chose to serve his community, to protect people, to make his town safer. On that March night, Officer Toney was working, and he encountered Benjamin Ritchie. The details of what happened are part of the court record. A confrontation occurred, and Officer Toney was killed. The loss devastated his family, his wife, his children, his fellow officers. An entire community mourned a good man taken too soon. Benjamin was arrested quickly. The evidence was clear. He didn't deny what he'd done. The question became, what should happen to him? The prosecutors sought the death penalty. They argued that killing a police officer was one of the most serious crimes possible. Officer Toney was protecting the community, and he lost his life doing it. Justice demanded the ultimate punishment. But Benjamin's defense attorney saw something else. They saw a man with severe brain damage. They hired experts to examine him. The doctor's findings were striking. Benjamin's brain scans showed significant abnormalities. Tests revealed he had the cognitive abilities far below what you'd expect for his age. His impulse control was severely impaired. One doctor explained it this way. Imagine you're driving a car, but the brakes don't work properly. You see danger ahead. You try to stop, but your foot pushes the brake pedal and nothing happens fast enough. That's what it's like for someone with severe FASD trying to control their actions. The defense argued that executing someone with this level of brain damage was wrong. Not because Benjamin didn't do something terrible. He did. But because his brain was so damaged that he couldn't be held to the same standard as someone with a normal, functioning brain. The jury heard all of this. They listened to the experts. They saw the brain scans. They learned about FASD and what it does to a person. And they sentenced Benjamin Ritchie to death anyway. The appeals process began. It would last 25 years. 25 years is a long time. Think about what you were doing 25 years ago, or what your parents were doing. Think about all the things that have changed in the world since then. For all those years, Benjamin sat in a small cell. The appeals went up and down through the court system. Each time, his lawyers brought the same evidence: the brain damage, the FASD, the impaired judgment. Each time, the court said it didn't matter enough to change the sentence. By 2025, Benjamin had been on death row longer than some of the guards working there had been alive. Indiana's death penalty system is unusual. The state keeps everything secret. In most states, there's at least some transparency. The public can know what drugs are used, who supplies them, what the protocol is. In Indiana, it's all hidden. The execution team's identities are secret. Their training is secret. Where they get the drugs is secret. The exact procedures they follow are secret. The state says this is to protect the people involved from harassment. But critics say it makes it impossible to know if executions are being done properly. As May 20th approached, Benjamin's lawyers tried everything. They filed motions arguing that executing someone with severe FASD violated the Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. They pointed to Supreme Court cases. In 2002, The court banned executing people with intellectual disabilities. In 2005, they banned executing people who committed crimes as children because young brains aren't fully developed. Benjamin's lawyers argued this was the same principle. His brain was permanently damaged. He would never have normal adult judgment, no matter how old he got. The courts disagreed. They said FASD, even severe FASD, wasn't the same as intellectual disability under the law. Days before the execution, Benjamin's team reached out to Governor Mike Braun. They asked for clemency, for the governor to use his power to change the sentence to life in prison instead. They presented him with letters from medical experts, from people who'd studied Benjamin's case, from organizations that work with FASD patients. The message was clear: this execution would be different. Benjamin's brain might react to the drugs differently. There was a real risk something could go wrong. Governor Braun reviewed the request. He met with prosecutors. He considered the arguments, and he denied clemency. In his statement, the governor focused on Officer Toney, on the family who'd lost a loved one, on the crime that had been committed. He said justice needed to be served. The execution would proceed as planned. May 20th arrived. Benjamin spent his final day in a cell. He met with his lawyers one last time. He was given a final meal. As midnight approached, he was led to the execution chamber. The room was small, clinical. There was a gurney, basically a medical bed. Witnesses sat behind glass in a separate area. Among them was Tommy Kleckner, the reporter, members of Officer Toney's family, prison officials, Benjamin's spiritual advisor. No cameras, no recording devices, just human eyes and human memory to record what was about to happen. Benjamin was strapped to the gurney. IVs were inserted into his arms. The warden read the execution order. Benjamin was asked if he had any final words. What he said, we know from the witnesses. But what he was thinking, feeling, experiencing, we can only imagine. The clock reached 12:30 a.m. The signal was given. The pentobarbital began flowing into his veins. According to the protocol, he should have simply fallen asleep, peacefully, quietly, within seconds. That's not what happened. The drug entered Benjamin's bloodstream at 12:30 a.m. For the witnesses watching through the glass, the next few minutes would be impossible to forget. Pentobarbital is a barbiturate, a type of sedative. In small doses, doctors use it to treat seizures or help people sleep. In the massive dose used for executions, it's supposed to shut down the brain and then stop the heart. The process should be quick. The person becomes unconscious within seconds. Their breathing slows and stops. Their heart stops. It's over. But Benjamin's brain wasn't like other brains. Remember that damage from the alcohol exposure before he was born? That wasn't just about behavior and impulse control. It affected the actual structure of his brain, the way his neurons connected, the way his brain processed chemicals. When the pentobarbital hit his system, something unexpected happened. Benjamin's body began to move. At first, it might have seemed normal. Small movements, muscle twitches. That can happen during executions, reflexes as the body shuts down. But then it got worse. The witnesses watched in shock. This went on for minutes. Long, uncomfortable minutes where everyone in that room had to wonder, what's happening? Is he unconscious? Can he feel this? Tommy Kleckner, the reporter who'd witnessed executions before, later said he'd never seen anything like it. In other executions, the person just seemed to fall asleep. This was different. This was disturbing. The execution team didn't stop the process. They couldn't, or wouldn't, explain what was happening. They just watched and waited. Medical experts who later heard about these movements were troubled. When a drug enters the body, the brain processes it. A damaged brain might process it differently, might react in unexpected ways. There's a concept in medicine called paradoxical reaction. Sometimes, a drug that's supposed to calm someone down does the opposite, makes them agitated, restless, even violent. It's rare, but it happens, especially in people with brain damage. Could that have been happening to Benjamin? Could his damaged brain have been fighting the drug instead of surrendering to it? Or were these just reflexes, as officials claimed? Unconscious movements from a body shutting down? The terrifying truth is, we don't know. We can't know. Because consciousness is invisible. You can't measure it just by looking at someone. A person can be paralyzed but awake. They can appear peaceful but be screaming inside their own mind. In medical settings, when doctors put someone under anesthesia, they use monitors, brainwave monitors, heart rate monitors. blood pressure monitors. They watch for signs that the person might be aware, might be in pain. None of that equipment was in Indiana's execution chamber. The execution team isn't required to have medical training. They follow a written protocol. They inject the drugs. They wait. They check for a pulse. But they can't see inside Benjamin's mind. They can't know what he experienced in those minutes. The movements continued. 3 minutes. 4 minutes. 5. Finally, they began to slow. Benjamin's body went still. The team waited. They checked his vital signs. They waited some more. At 12:44 a.m., 14 minutes after the execution began, Benjamin Ritchie was pronounced dead. The witnesses filed out. The brief official statement was prepared. The media was told. The execution was carried out. No complications. But no complications is a matter of perspective. For the officials, it meant the person died as intended. Mission accomplished. For the witnesses who saw those violent movements, no complications felt like a lie. Tommy Kleckner spoke to other journalists afterward. He described what he'd seen. He said it raised serious questions about whether the execution had been humane. Medical experts who study executions were concerned too. Dr. Joel Zivit, an anesthesiologist who researches lethal injection, explained that movements like those described could indicate several things. Maybe just reflexes. Maybe seizures. Maybe something worse. Without proper monitoring, without medical expertise in the room, without any video evidence, it's impossible to know. And that's by design. Indiana's secrecy laws mean we'll never have answers. There's no video to review. No medical data to analyze. No way to investigate what really happened in that room. The state says this secrecy protects the execution team. But it also protects the state from accountability. If something goes wrong during an execution, who would know? Who could prove it? Who could demand changes? This isn't just about Benjamin Ritchie. Since states started using lethal injection in the 1970s, there have been dozens of problematic executions across America. Cases where people gasped for air for minutes, where they appeared to be in pain, where the process took hours instead of minutes, where witnesses described scenes that sounded more like torture than a humane punishment. And in many of those cases, officials said the same thing, just reflexes. No pain, no suffering. Everything went according to plan. But how can we trust those assurances when everything happens in secret? Officer Toney's family was in that witness room. They'd waited 25 years for this moment. They deserved justice for their loved one. But did what they witnessed look like justice? Or did it look like something else? Some family members of murder victims support the death penalty. They say it brings closure. It honors their loved one. It ensures the killer can never hurt anyone else. Others oppose it. They say it doesn't bring their loved one back. It doesn't heal the pain. It just creates more violence, more death. We don't know how Officer Toney's family felt watching Benjamin's execution. That's private. That's their own experience to process. But we do know this. What happened on May 20th, 2025, raised questions that affect all of us. Questions about what we're willing to accept in the name of justice. Questions about whether we can carry out executions humanely when we do them in total secrecy. Questions about what happens when we execute people whose brains were broken before they ever had a choice. Benjamin Ritchie made terrible choices. The damage to his brain doesn't erase what he did. It doesn't bring Officer Toney back. It doesn't heal the trauma his family endured. But it does matter. It matters because if we're going to take someone's life as punishment, we should be absolutely certain we're doing it in a way that's humane, that doesn't cause unnecessary suffering, that we can defend and explain. Indiana's system doesn't allow for that certainty. The drugs are secret. The suppliers are secret. The team is secret. The procedures are secret. And when something looks wrong, there's no way to investigate because there's no evidence, no recording, no transparency. After Benjamin's execution, some lawmakers and advocates called for changes. They asked for independent medical oversight, for video recording of executions, for more transparency about the drugs and procedures used. The state has resisted those calls. The official position remains, trust us. We know what we're doing. Everything is fine. But after what witnesses saw on May 20th, that trust feels harder to give. The sun rose on May 21st, 2025. Benjamin Ritchie was gone. But the questions his execution raised were just beginning. In the days after, medical experts across the country spoke up. They wanted to understand what had happened in that execution chamber. Dr. Jonathan Groner, a professor of surgery who studies lethal injection, reviewed the witness descriptions. He explained that violent movements during an execution could mean several things. One possibility: the dose wasn't enough to fully anesthetize Benjamin. His damaged brain might have needed more of the drug to become unconscious. If he was still partly aware, his body might have been reacting to suffocation, because that's what pentobarbital does. It stops your breathing while your heart is still beating. Imagine drowning, but you can't move enough to save yourself. That's what inadequate anesthesia during a pentobarbital execution might feel like. Another possibility: seizures. Brain damage makes people more prone to seizures, and pentobarbital itself can sometimes cause them, especially in damaged brains. A third possibility: the movements were indeed just reflexes, and Benjamin felt nothing. Without medical monitoring equipment in that room, we'll never know which one is true. This story makes us think about big questions, questions our society has to answer together. What do you think? Drop a comment and let's talk about it. The debate about the death penalty has gone on for decades. Good people disagree about it. Some believe that certain crimes are so terrible that death is the only appropriate punishment, that society has a right to permanently remove its most dangerous members, that families of victims deserve this ultimate form of justice. Others believe the death penalty is always wrong, that killing is wrong even when the government does it, that life in prison without parole achieves the same goal, protecting society, without taking another life. And then there are people in the middle. People who might support the death penalty in theory, but worry about how it's carried out in practice. Benjamin Ritchie's case highlights those practical concerns. Since 1973, over 190 people have been released from death row in America after being proven innocent. Nearly 200 people who were sentenced to die, who spent years in prison, who came close to execution, and they didn't do it. If our system made that many mistakes about guilt, how many mistakes is it making about other things? About whether someone's brain damage should matter. About whether executions are humane. The secrecy makes it impossible to know. 31 states still have the death penalty on their books, but many of them haven't used it in years. They're uncomfortable with it. They're not sure it's worth the cost, the risk, the moral weight. Indiana hadn't executed anyone for 15 years before Benjamin. 15 years is a long time to go between executions. It suggests uncertainty, reluctance. And yet, when they did resume executions, they did so in complete secrecy, with no outside oversight, with an execution team that isn't required to have medical expertise. Does that sound like a system we can trust with the power over life and death? After Benjamin's execution, his lawyers released a statement. They talked about his brain damage, about the movement witnesses saw, about their belief that what happened was cruel and unusual punishment, the exact thing the Constitution forbids. But their client was dead. There was no reversing it. No do-over. No appeal. That's the thing about the death penalty. It's final. Every other punishment, prison, fines, probation, can be undone if we learn we made a mistake, if new evidence emerges, if we realize something we did was wrong. But death? Death is permanent. Officer William Toney is still gone. His family still lives with that loss every day. Nothing about Benjamin's execution brought Officer Toney back. Nothing changed the fact that a good man died too young, that children lost their father, that a community lost a protector. The question isn't whether Officer Toney's death was a tragedy. It absolutely was. The question is whether Benjamin Ritchie's execution made anything better, whether it was done humanely, whether we can be confident in a system that operates in total darkness. Some of Officer Toney's family members may have felt relief when Benjamin was executed. A chapter closed. Justice served. Others may have watched those 14 minutes and wondered if this was really what justice looks like. Both reactions are valid. Grief is complicated. Justice is complicated. There are no simple answers. But we owe it to everyone, to victims, to the accused, to ourselves, to ask hard questions. If we're going to have the death penalty, shouldn't we do it transparently? Shouldn't medical professionals be involved? Shouldn't there be video evidence so we can verify executions are humane? If we can't answer yes to those questions, maybe we shouldn't be doing it at all. Benjamin Ritchie's story is one story, but it represents hundreds of stories. People on death rows across America. Some guilty, some innocent, some with damaged brains, some who were children when they committed their crimes, some who are mentally ill, each one a human being, each one someone's child, each one capable of suffering. We're a society that believes in human dignity. We've abolished torture. We've written laws against cruel and unusual punishment. We say we value life. But when we execute people in secret, with no oversight, with no way to know if they suffered, are we living up to those values? Benjamin Ritchie killed Officer Toney. That's a fact. What he did was terrible and wrong. But what happened to Benjamin on May 20th, 2025, in those 14 minutes, behind closed doors, with no cameras and no monitors, that raises questions about who we are as a society. Are we capable of carrying out executions humanely? Do we even know if we are, given how much secrecy surrounds the process? And if we're not sure, if we can't verify it, if we won't allow transparency, should we be doing it at all? These aren't easy questions. They require us to balance competing values: justice for victims, dignity for all humans, safety for society, fairness and punishment. But they're questions we have to ask, because every time we execute someone, we do it in our names. As citizens, as a society, we're the ones who have to live with what that means. May 21st, 2025 came and went. The news cycle moved on. Most people forgot about Benjamin Ritchie, but the people who were in that room, the witnesses, the staff, the people who saw what happened, they can't forget. And the questions remain. What did Benjamin experience in those final minutes? Was he aware? Did he suffer? We'll never know for certain. Indiana's secrecy laws ensure that. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the question isn't what Benjamin experienced. Maybe the question is, what kind of society are we willing to be? One that kills in secret and asks for blind trust? Or one that demands accountability, transparency, and proof that we're living up to our own values? The answer to that question will determine what happens to the next Benjamin Ritchie, and the one after that, and all the others waiting on death rows across the nation. Officer Toney deserved justice. His family deserved justice. But justice shouldn't happen in the dark. Justice should be something we can see, verify, and defend. Until we can do that, until we're willing to shine light on what happens in execution chambers, we can't truly say we know what we're doing. And that should trouble all of us. Because the power over life and death is the greatest power a government can have. And power without accountability is something we should never accept. The story of Benjamin Ritchie ends here. But the questions it raises will continue. What happened in that room on May 20th, 2025? We may never know the full truth. But we owe it to ourselves, to Officer Toney, and yes, even to Benjamin Ritchie, to keep asking. Because in the end, how we treat the worst among us says everything about who we are. And that's a reflection we can't look away from.